broadcasting from the Unshackled studios in Melbourne. This is WilmsFront, brought to you by the Unshackled.net. Now here's Tim Wilms.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this extra special episode of WilmsFront on this Thursday, the 18th of March, 2021. It is 8:30 p.m. here in Melbourne. We are live on the WilmsFront YouTube and DLive channels, as well as on the YouTube and DLive Enhanced Entropy software, where throughout the show you can ask a question or send through a super chat. As viewers of this show and followers of the Unshackled would well know, the most integral part of our mission has been to protect freedom and free speech, which are constantly under attack, especially over the course of this pandemic, with the lockdowns and police states restrictions all throughout the Western world. There has been much discussion and debate about whether the suspension of our freedom and human rights in Australia under emergency powers over the past year are both lawful at the statute and constitutional level. Now, when it comes to the politics of the use of these emergency powers, particularly at the state level, the voters in Australia have rewarded premiers who've implemented draconian lockdowns and COVID control measures with re-election at the ballot box, as we saw with the landslide re-election of the West Australian Labor Premier, Mark McGowan, last Saturday. He has absolute power now in the state. The Labor Party controls both the lower and upper house. They can pass any legislation they like, and Mark McGowan's cult of personality is now just so widespread that he's also made himself, in his new cabinet today, Mark McGowan treasurer as well. He's got the most two senior roles in the state now, because he thinks, and the voters of WA obviously think, he's so good. So these are the issues of concern we will explore with my featured guest tonight, who I interviewed earlier today, which I'll play for you now. And once that's concluded, it goes for about an hour and 10 minutes. I'll come back live to wrap up the show, but I'll be commenting with you in the live chats throughout the show to answer any queries you may have. So let's turn now to my featured interview and guest.
This is WilmsFront, brought to you by the Unshackled.net.
It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Augusto Zimmerman. He is the Dean of Law at the Sheridan Institute of Higher Education in Perth. He is also the President of the West Australian Legal Theory Association and Editor-in-Chief of the West Australian Juris Law Journal. He was a Law Reform Commissioner for Western Australia from 2012 to 2017. Augusto was born and raised in Brazil, migrating to Australia in the early 2000s. He is legal and political commentary has appeared in numerous Australian publications, including Quadrant, The Spectator Australia, Cauldron Pool, The Good Source, The Unshackled, and most recently, The Epoch Times. He has authored and edited a long list of books over his academic career. The latest is Fundamental Rights in the Age of COVID-19, edited with his colleague Joshua Forrester, published by Connor Court Publishing. I'm looking forward to discussing with him his book, The State of the Rule of Law and Human Rights in Australia, 1 year after the pandemic was declared, and also his thoughts on the West Australian state election fallout, including the near wipeout of the West Australian Liberal Party. Augusto, it's great to see you again, and welcome to WilmsFront, because I haven't had you on this format before.
Thanks, Tim. It's a great pleasure to talk to you again. You are doing a great job.
Oh, thank you so much. Now, as I said, you've published and edited numerous books, and your most recent one is incredibly timely. Mm-hmm. So, Fundamental Rights in the Age of COVID. So, you've edited this. There's topics on various aspects of the pandemic and associated lockdown. And obviously, being a law professor, you've been following the well, the imposition of these emergency laws, and well, they've basically been rubber stamped by the courts whenever there's been a challenge. I think many Australians were quite shocked to realise that over the years, all of these emergency laws and powers they've been passed bipartisanly. Nobody really paid attention to the time, yet they give the Premier the power to as we've seen, lock down a whole state, put the citizens under house arrest at a moment's notice. I think it's chilled quite a lot of people.
Well, they should be, because history tells us that what is considered to be initially a temporary measure can easily become a permanent one when the dictators start to develop a taste for power. And the measures then, rather than being just for a short period of time, they become more permanent ones. We are taking a very bad approach here, a very bad precedent. And I think not only I feel really worried about what the premiers and the governments are doing, but what really scares me is the passivity of the people and the worship of government. I think in many ways, as a result of the decline of the Christian faith in Australia, people are starting to develop another form of idolatry, which is the worship of government. And that is something that can cause us all sorts of problems, including the erosion, as I mentioned in my book, the book edited by me, of fundamental rights and freedoms, including freedom of movement, conscience, and freedom of speech as well.
Because we've seen in my home state of Victoria, the I Stand with Dans, the Dan stands who worship him, and it's even more. You talk about the replacement of religion, or the Christian faith. I've heard stories over there of West Australians getting tattoos of Mark McGowan.
This is another very terrible, scary development. I think the fear of death now has paralyzed many individuals. They are so worried about what can happen to them that they start to actually believe that government can be the savior. Mark McGowan behaves in a very terrible fashion. He's pushing for a very radical left-wing agenda that's entirely pro-death in many ways, by legalizing recently the killing of the most vulnerable elements of the society by euthanasia, and also the killing of the babies through abortion on demand. So this is a man who has no regard for human life at all, and his attitude is very arrogant, and he has imposed some laws that are absolutely arbitrary, and they remove not only basic elements of the rule of law, but they also, and more specifically, they undermine the principle of separation of powers, turning his government not only into the legislator, but also the executor of his own laws. And that's the path that leads to tyranny, as Montesquieu put it so well in his book on the spirit of the law.
We've also seen, well, the peaking, as I call it, of the rising paternalistic nanny state in Australia, the tyranny of public health experts. And Australians have become quite accustomed to bigger and bigger government over the past 3 decades. And whether it be issues such as climate change, it's always been trust the experts, listen to the science, and obviously not many people know really, or are willing to look up for themselves at how coronavirus actually works. And leaders such as Mark McGowan, Dan Andrews, they're able to get away with these draconian measures, restricting liberty, imposing a police state, saying it's following the health advice. Obviously, we understand that we've never required people to do this before, but this is health advice. You wouldn't go against, the implication is you wouldn't go against the advice of your GP.
Yes, but we have to take into account that some of these health advisors, they are actually not as qualified as very prominent academics in the United States, coming from Yale, Harvard University as well, telling us, Professor Ioannidis, Professor Katz, and many others, saying that these lockdowns are going to lead to further causalities, including perhaps more deaths than if they had taken a different approach. And the result of this is a massive depression, unemployment rates going to skyrocket, and also alcoholism and domestic violence as a result. So the measures that have been taken by people who don't have a holistic approach, and they actually have no knowledge of real epidemiology. They are just versed in the medical area, the medical field. But this is a problem that has a holistic, should have a holistic approach. We should have people who understand, for instance, constitutional law is a good example, because the preservation of our fundamental rights and freedoms are at stake at the moment that we are losing gradually our fundamental rights. And it's very important to bear in mind that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And certainly these health experts, they do not have the same level of democratic accountability that politicians might do have, and they are being given all these tasks and responsibilities that are not subscribed to them according to the basic principles of the rule of law.
We've seen a few court challenges to these emergency decrees and measures, public health orders, but it seems to me that Australian courts, they're too timid to slap down popular decisions by politicians, or at the more hyperbolic level, measures to stop the spread of a pandemic. And obviously the most restrictive measure, one of the most restrictive measures, I should say, was Mark McGowan's hard border closure, which was challenged by Clive Palmer under Section 2 of the Constitution. But the High Court of Australia said no, the WA Public Health Act does not violate Section 92 of the Constitution.
Mm-hmm. Of course, it violates the chapter, or better saying the section, this particular section in the Constitution, Section 92. I have written an article to explain how much it violates, but any kindergarten child would be able to know that the word absolute means absolute. I think now I'm 100% sure that the framers of our Constitution, in order to make this statement so clear, they said that intercourse and the free exchange of commerce, they have to be absolutely free. And that's what the particular section dictates. What the High Court has done is to undermine that provision by saying that we are facing an emergency situation. But that's nowhere to be found in the Constitution itself. There is nothing in the Constitution that would allow for this sort of creative interpretation of the court and empowering Premier McGowan to behave in a dictatorial fashion. What really concerns me is the fact that the Prime Minister of this country, coming from a supposed liberal party, has actually cheered with the victory of the Labour Party and even claimed the credit for the recent election. So what he says is that he supports the violation of fundamental rights in Western Australia, and he supports the ultimate undermining of the Constitution by premiers. Nothing of this would be happening if the Prime Minister of this country were not empowering these little dictators to behave in such an outrageous manner.
Well, I think Scott Morrison, he's been politically intimidated by how popular these premiers are. He saw the election result last year in the Queensland state election, with Anastasia Palaszczuk increasing her majority with her border closure with New South Wales. And then obviously he saw the West Australian election result on the wall for a while, and he's changed his tune pretty much, saying that no matter how ridiculous a snap lockdown is, or whether a state wants to put up a border or not, he's just said, well, it's up to them and we'll provide whatever support.
Because the narrative has been thoroughly controlled by the left. Perhaps being a left-wing person himself, Scott Morrison is taking delight in the suppression of these freedoms. Please do not forget that before this lockdown, he was known for being an opponent of freedom of speech. When Israel for Law was being criticized for his comments, he was giving credit to Rugby League. He only changed his mind when he realized that his approach was becoming unpopular. This is a man who has no commitment to free speech. He claims that free speech doesn't give a single job, when as a matter of fact, it doesn't create a single job. When as a matter of fact, the lack of free speech is causing many people to lose their jobs, including Professor Reid in that university. What's the name? James Cook
University. Yes.
Exactly. And he was challenging the narrative of the establishment of the status quo, which basically the prime minister epitomizes, and he paid a very high price for this. What is really, really scary in this country is that the politicians, they think they are above the law. Certainly the premier will be able to travel interstate and having a good life, where everybody lives under his rule in a very oppressive fashion. And the elites probably found a very good excuse for this, is the fear of death. The fear of death is now making people exchange all other freedoms and rights for the supposed right of the government to protect them. That reminds me of Hobbes, this whole idea that we exchange our preservation of our life, better saying our freedoms, for the preservation of our life. And the life and the idea that the government is the ultimate protector is becoming so prevalent that in the end of the day, a society that puts the right to be alive above everything, you end up not having this protection because of the fact that governments can become so oppressive that they ultimately can eventually even undermine their very right to stay alive.
Having lived through that 112-day stage 4 Melbourne lockdown, I can tell you there wasn't much quality of life, which is always what they leave out when they justifying these draconian measures to protect human life. It was an absolutely miserable time here. You in Perth got a taste of it with the 5-day snap lockdown, but as you've pointed out, Dan Andrews and his government are still incredibly popular, and the Victorian Liberal Party, well, after the events of this week with the failed spill, they look even more of a rabble.
Yeah, but they endorse the argument of the Labour Party and the left-wing parties. What's happening here is that the Liberal Party has become a sort of Labour light. And even in this election here in Western Australia, there was a total lack of alternative. We had a very idiotic leader of the opposition, a young person who certainly behaved in such a manner very responsibly, claiming that he had an energy policy that would embarrass even the Greens. Not even the Greens would be so stupid to promise that in 5 years we would not have coal anymore, and certainly in 10 years there will be a total reliable renewable energy policy, and that would basically be the end of coal and other forms of traditional energy. That was such a crazy remark that the leader of the opposition became a subject of ridicule. And then he started to say things that are coming from a very left-wing perspective. We know very well that he supports the LGBTQ agenda in full force, and he is also a supporter of every single piece of legislation the government has passed, especially the most controversial ones. So, in a certain sense, what happened in Western Australia was a total lack of confidence that the Liberal Party would make anything different. He was, for instance, a strong supporter of the borders, the strong borders. So if you vote for him, there would be no difference at all. The problem that I see is the lack of alternative and the fact that the Liberal Party has been taken over by members of the left.
Well, don't forget that the South Australian Liberal Premier Stephen Marshall, he basically pioneered this new phenomenon of the snap lockdown due to a few cases that had escaped from hotel quarantine. He also put up hard borders if there are outbreaks in other states. And I know that Gladys Berejiklian is described as having the gold standard when it comes to COVID, but the cost of, well, the trade-off is as though you've got, although she's not locking down areas apart from the northern beaches over Christmas, she's got this centralized QR code database which essentially tracks where every person in New South Wales has been, which is another issue or problem coming out of this pandemic.
Well, look, thanks for referring to this fact, because the Liberal Party was decimated as a result of being Labour light. I don't like Diet Coke. I would rather have normal one. But now that they have gone woke, I don't even buy anymore. But I'll tell you one thing. The problem with the Liberal Party is that they want to be reaching out to the left and with this environmental policy. What is most disturbing here is that the last of the Mohicans now, one of the remaining members, I think there are only 3 now, members of the Liberal Party Parliament, is the main culprit of the disaster that took place here in Western Australia. Is that guy called David Haney. This man is an extreme leftist. He should be joining the Communist Party. The man, it's a disgrace. He even came to the point now of accusing conservatives for having been responsible for the defeat. He referred to the so-called religious right. Well, if he opposes the religious right, I think I can call him the ungodly left, because he's the opposite of the religious right. Now we have, as one of the leaders of the party parliament, a member of the ungodly left, a man who has nothing about classical liberal values in his veins.
And they were pretty quick to, well, shun or dismiss candidates who had Christian views or, well, you'd say alternate views. If I go to this, one of the Liberal candidates, Andrea Toje, this is from the SMH, reports that on Cauldron Pool, which is a website that you've written for, talking about and this was early in April 2020, and she mentioned, well, explored the rollout of 5G, which is not a theory about the spread of COVID that I support and isn't supported by much evidence, but she was cut loose instantly like that. And then another, not that one, this candidate here was gagged. Amanda Sue Markham, who was married to Pastor Campbell Markham.
Well, look, it is a disgrace what happened, because I supposed that, to be frank with you, I already knew that this wasn't so. But the Liberal Party is supposed to be an umbrella party where we have people from all sorts of walks. And the idea of being a liberal is exactly that we would have freedom to expose and express ideas and have these ideas being challenged in the marketplace of ideas in a proper manner. The way they treated Andrea Tokaji was absolutely despicable. The lady actually wrote a very good article for Cauldron Pool, apart from that paragraph that I totally disagree with. I certainly think there's nothing to make a link between 5G with COVID. I find it bizarre. But the rest of the article is fantastic when she's talking about her legacy, the fact that she came with her family fleeing from communism. Perhaps the leader of opposition here is very concerned that communism has been criticized. I don't know. Zach seems to be such a commie that perhaps that is the reason they got rid of her. But she made excellent points about communist oppression. And also the fact that the governments were perhaps exaggerating on the policies and measures that they were taking to fight the virus. I agree entirely. As a constitutional lawyer, I'm extremely worried about the undermining of fundamental legal rights as a result of what's happening. Then she wrote this excellent article, apart from that terrible paragraph. But they didn't give her a right to explain herself. What happened reminds me of Stalin's Soviet Union, or the behavior of the Gestapo during Nazi Germany, where they just executed the sender of the message. What Zach and his mafia did to Andrea Tokaji was absolutely repulsive. A party that claims to be a party that's of liberty and freedom didn't allow her even to explain herself properly. They fired her on the phone. What can be more cruel than that? I think they should be deeply ashamed of themselves.
Yeah, they didn't even give her a chance to reply, maybe put it in some context. And it was published nearly a year ago when there was a lot of unknowns about the virus at the time. And I'm sure that if she was asked about it, she would have more refined views about the virus.
Yes, we thank goodness I don't remember to have ever written something of this nature. I feel sorry for her, but on the other hand, Andrea is a human rights activist in the right sense of the word, because she fights for real human rights, the rights of real refugees, for instance, and she would be a great asset for the party. And it seems that she was campaigning very hard. What happened is so cruel, because she was actually an excellent campaigner. And people were appreciating her comments. They destroyed her character. They tried to assassinate her image. And it was all done by the Zach guy in his group, because she was one of the most active, charismatic candidates that we had, and she fights for human rights. What's the problem? Doesn't he like human rights? What's the problem with him? I really don't know, but this whole thing makes me rather suspicious.
And the other candidate who wasn't disendorsed but gagged, Amanda Sue Markham, which, well, if you can't really, if the leader gags you, then you can't really do much in a campaign.
Yeah, the detail is that it seems that this whole thing is based on the comments made by another person, namely her husband. Yes. I mean, I don't know. My wife has the right to have an opinion. It doesn't mean that I have to agree with everything she says. But how can I be punished for the things that others have said? Is Zach a person who has such a totalitarian worldview that he doesn't understand that I will never be responsible for the things that my mother, my daughter, or my dog, whoever says? I have no responsibility over that. And it's the fact that he was trying to somehow prevent her to basically be what she is and discuss these matters with the public, it's really despicable. It actually reminds me of what they did to Sherry Sufi when he was a candidate in Fremantle. Sherry is from Pakistan, and he was opposing same-sex marriage. Somehow they found something in his curriculum to get rid of him. So it's a very strange party where if you have something in your curriculum that you put there is not exactly like that, you must be executed. But if you have an affair with a woman from the Greens, and you are the treasurer, you can be forgiven, as it happened to Troy Boswell here. Or if you have an affair as an attorney general with people and becoming a little bit of a controversial character in Canberra for having his sexual adventures, then you'll be forgiven as well. So it's a very strange thing that these people have such dubious moral standards. That's why I'm so honored and delighted to have resigned from the Liberal Party, a party that I happen to be the senior vice president in Fremantle. But I thought that remaining in the party would very severely damage my image and my reputation, not just as an academic, but as a human being.
At the federal level, the Liberal Party has always performed strongly in Western Australia. Currently, they hold 11 of the 16 seats, but with the AEC redistribution, WA will lose a seat. There's obviously a lot of speculation about where that will be, but obviously state and federal issues tend to be, voters tend to separate them. But if such a result was anywhere near replicated here at a federal level, and obviously with the departure of some of the more, what would you call them, WA Liberals at the federal level who have stature, such as Julie Bishop and Matthias Cormann, who got the job as the Secretary General of the OECD. You referenced Christian Porter there. He is on mental health leave until the end of the month, after outing himself as the minister accused of historical rape, and is now proceeding with defamation against Louise Milligan and the ABC. You have Linda Reynolds also on medical leave, followed by...
Look, we have a defense minister who is on health leave because of an issue that happened in his office. Can you imagine how we can have a defense minister if we have a situation that, for instance, China declares war on us and she has a collapse, she has a mental breakdown? I mean, we cannot have her as a defense minister if she can't cope with this small problem, a situation that's really terrible, but it's much of a lesser gravity than if we are engaged in a war against China or against India. I don't know. It's just quite clear to me that she's not the person fit for the position. You need to find someone who is not freaking out all the time for any circumstance. A defense minister has to be a very bold, strong, and courageous individual.
What did you make of... Well, it got leaked to the media that she called Brittany Higgins a lying cow in her office, not in regard to the rape allegation, but that she didn't receive enough support. Then Brittany Higgins' lawyer sent a defamation notice, and Linda Reynolds settled that, paid a sum of her own money the next week. What did you make of that whole defamation case and settlement? Because it was quite unusual.
Yeah, well, to be frank with you, this lady was not into trouble as a result of the fact that she apparently was abused. But she entered in the building after hours together with another man, and she actually committed an illicitude. She was not supposed to be in the building. She was not supposed to be drunk, and she was not supposed to be doing the things that she did. So after we have the fact, of course, that something really terrible might have occurred, we are forgiving her for the crimes that she committed that were infractions of the rules of Parliament. After our rules of Parliament, nobody's saying this. I mean, everybody's quiet. This whole episode is really disgraceful. Linda Reynolds has a problem with her approach that tends to be very inclusive, but in the wrong sense of the word. She even made a ridiculous statement a couple of years ago saying that you should have mixed AFL teams. So that tells me that how stupid the person can be, saying that AFL teams should have mixed players of both genders. This was a subject of ridicule for obvious reasons. And so she wants to create an army with all sorts of inclusive groups, homosexuals, transgenders. I thought that to have an army is to have the best people who can protect us, and it shouldn't be a matter of political correctness or affirmative action policies that she's pushing. So the sooner she goes, the better.
And also the other WA federal Liberal MPs, the most senior one at the moment is Michaelia Cash, who's had quite a colourful career as well. So it has, you could say, 9 political lives. She survived what was described as the whiteboard incident after a staffer resigned after a media leak. And you mentioned Linda Reynolds, defence minister in charge of defence personnel, but then you have Melissa Price, also a WA Liberal MP, defence industry minister, and that's a whole other area of defence which Australia is struggling with. And that was a demotion that she got because she was so terrible as Environment Minister before the last election.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so you see that we are not very well served here. That's perhaps the reason as to why Scott Morrison claimed credit for the Labour landslide victory recently. The landslide was amazing. It left the Liberal Party with probably 2 and no more than 3 members in the Parliament. And I think what Scott Morrison is doing is to say the premiers are popular, the Labour premiers in particular, including this dreadful premier in Victoria. But he's saying, I have empowered them. I have helped them to violate the Constitution. I should claim credit for being also empowering these oppressors. So Scott Morrison, perhaps realizing that the Liberal Party is finished in Western Australia, will be trying to run a campaign saying, if you want to have me as a Prime Minister, let's disassociate us from the state branch of the Liberal Party, and let's have only these federal hopeless politicians that we have in Western Australia to support me, so we can continue to destroy the economy of the country and to destroy the fundamental rights of the people. And what I'm not, as I say, and I repeat it again, I'm not surprised that the ruling elites have no regard for the people, because after all, I was president of the division here, a commissioner, and I know very well what they are capable of doing. But what surprises me is the naivety of the Australian people. It's how stupid people can be to think that these politicians have any regard for them when they're actually mocking them and laughing at them on the backs.
In your book, there's also a chapter on civil disobedience in the COVID age, which obviously you thankfully just saw from afar, the brutal conduct of Victoria Police over the second half of 2020, suppressing the various Freedom Day events, and well, that's continued into 2021. Even though we have slightly less onerous restrictions, there's still public gathering limits of 100. That obese Assistant Commissioner Luke Cornelius, he still is the operations manager of all the public order response. There's another rally this weekend, the Worldwide Rally for Freedom, which is occurring nationwide. But again, it's another, you'd say, indicator of just how much of a police state Victoria still is, even though Dan Andrews is in the sick ward for at least the next 6 weeks. But all of these protests and the conduct of Victoria Police, it still hasn't had any impact at all in changing much public opinion, not just in Victoria, but elsewhere.
Well, when I lived in Victoria about 20 years ago, I knew this would end up like that because of the fact that my fellow Australians, especially in Victoria, have this sort of naivety when it comes to what governments can do and deliver. So it's not surprising in a certain sense. But when we refer to that article on civil resistance and the fight for, according to our tradition, the lawful right to resist oppression, I'm not actually saying that we are going to uphold this tradition. That's a tradition that led to the development of Western constitutionalism. And this article is based on a more comprehensive chapter in a book written by Emeritus Professor Gabriel Moines, one of our brightest legal minds in this country, an amazing academic, one of our top constitutional lawyers, who was basically appealing to John Locke and our tradition of the rule of law, namely, according to even our first Chief Justice in this country, Sir Samuel Griffith, where he, in one of the first decisions of the High Court, made it very clear that the purpose of the law and judicial enforcement of the law is the protection of the basic rights of the individual to life, liberty, and property. So if any measure affects these three basic elements of natural law, the natural rights, we have, according to this tradition, the right to resist. It's actually a lawful right because the measures being arbitrary, they violate the rule of law in the first place. It is not wrong to fight against oppression. It's not wrong to say to a ruler who violates the rule of law that you have the right lawfully to resist. And that's what I try to explain in the article. But just to make it a little bit disappointing now, I don't think Australians know this aspect of our tradition because they have been dumped down by our legal system, our educational system, and they have now developed a total lack of knowledge of who they are by means of the deconstructionist policies of multiculturalism. So unfortunately, Australians have no idea of their own rights and freedoms. They have no idea of who they are, and that's why they are very prone to become enslaved and oppressed by these ruling elites, because they have no idea and no sense of human dignity.
We're also, it's quite obvious that there's a lot of selective policing going on, particularly in Victoria. The fact that these March for Justices could occur all throughout Australia with the police all the only instances of police moving in is when a few feminist activists glued themselves to the intersection in Flinders Street in Melbourne. So there's definitely equality of the law was thrown out a long time ago, but we're seeing, well, it was turbocharged by Brittany Higgins' allegation. Obviously, Grace Tame being named Australian of the Year definitely put the issue of assault and violence against women at the forefront. And then there's obviously the allegation, historical allegation against Christian Porter. I call this the Me Too 2.0 movement, and it's hard to tell what their demands are, but clearly they are wanting to undermine our current rule of law legal system and just basically replace our legal system with kangaroo courts where they get the outcomes that they want.
Yes, and all this should be addressed by the Attorney General before. Unfortunately, he gave an interview to the Q&A saying that women should be believed. I think now I'm 100% sure that he now doesn't think the same. When it happens
he said
to
that. He said that.
He said that about 5 years ago in a Q&A.
Wow, you've got an even good political encyclopedia of memory than myself.
Yes, and Scott Morrison also spent $500 million in a domestic violence feminist campaign to demonize white men in this country. So they're getting what they created. It's a really terrible thing that now especially Christian parties, having to face this situation. But the case of Christian Porter reminds me what happened to that Father Fleming in South Australia. I don't know if you know the case, but he was falsely accused by a newspaper when the police had proven that the accusations had no evidence. He was discharged. And what happened after this is that the local newspaper in South Australia published an article verifying him. The funny thing, the terrible thing, the interesting aspect, if I can put it like that, is that Father Fleming's name was referred in the article. So it was mentioned. And it was mentioned as a person had committed a terrible crime about 30 years ago, raping a girl. It's very similar story. But Father Fleming certainly is innocent. And he sued the newspaper for that. The amazing thing is that it was a defamation case. He was entirely innocent. There was no criminal conviction, nothing. And the judge absurdly didn't give him the victory there. He lost his defamation lawsuit. And then he appealed to the Supreme Court. He lost again. And the High Court refused to receive a special leave in order to entertain the matter. So he didn't have the chance that Cardinal Pell had because he doesn't have the power, perhaps he doesn't have the money to have the High Court giving a chance to him. So at the end of the day, he has his life completely destroyed. And this is an innocent man. What I did was to send a letter to Christian Porter, informing him on this matter, asking for his help. And the irony of this is that this can set up a precedent now, and the precedent can now be used against Christian Porter himself. So my understanding of the matter, and just wait a little bit more because I'm writing on the subject, I'll publish as an article, is that Christian Porter is running the risk of losing the case, and that will be very bad for him. If he thinks that his defamation lawsuit will be successful, it will be giving him the outcome that he expects, I think he might be quite disappointed in the end of the day. The person who will be the judge if the case is eventually decided by a federal judge is a person who was appointed in the Rudd government, by Kevin Rudd. And she is very loved by the left. And by the way, her promotion to the High Court was rejected by Christian Porter himself. So he doesn't have a person who really likes him to be deciding on the matter. And that precedent that he refused to help when he could have offered help, and he refused, can now be used against him and can lead to a very undesirable outcome. So I really feel sorry for Christian, and I think there is a good chance that he's going to lose his lawsuit.
And if that happens, it'll be politically spun is that he's guilty of that historical allegation.
Yeah.
Now, another issue that you've written about is the state of religious freedom and liberty in Australia. Now, Scott Morrison, he identifies as a Pentecostal Christian it was actually Malcolm Turnbull who, in response to the legalization of same-sex marriage, set up the Religious Freedom Review, and Scott Morrison announced that he wanted, if he won the 2019 federal election, set up a federal religious discrimination act. Now, I know that you at the time, and so did I, were concerned that this could end up becoming a blasphemy act, sort of like how our Victorian Racial and Religious Tolerance Act worked, but it was still Scott Morrison's solution to uphold religious freedom and liberty. But to show how much he actually cares about the issue, it seems to have been put on the back burner. We haven't heard anything about it.
Well, yes, but anyway, it might be a blessing in disguise, because you know that Christian Porter was overseeing this, and the piece of law proposal, the bill that they were thinking about introducing in Parliament, was a disaster. He wanted to actually further empower the human rights the Human Rights Commission, the Australian Human Rights Commission. And the Human Rights Commission is notorious for violating human rights. And you have, for instance, the case of the students in QUT who were fighting against racism, who were accused of being racist, and the Human Rights Commission didn't help them. So the Human Rights Commission, it's terrible, a terrible entity. And then they would add the religious elements to the other elements, such as race and gender. That is going the wrong way. So, of course, that tells me a lot about their commitment to religious freedom, undoubtedly, because they could create a decent Religious Freedom Act. But even if the Religions Act that they created was a decent one, which is almost impossible to happen in this government, they can't even repeal Section 18C. I mean, you're asking a government to
which is another one of your books.
And they are incapable even to repeal a simple provision in the Anti-Discrimination Act that has been used as an instrument of oppression, the silencing of opposition, and people who fight for human rights are being victims of this law. But I can tell you one thing. Rather than thinking about creating more junk, because this would be used by the anti-discrimination industry, what we really need to do is to start repealing the existing provisions that undermine freedom of speech. I was really concerned about the hijacking of this approach of the Religious Freedom Act by radical extremists, especially coming from the Muslim religion, who were basically trying to use this as an opportunity to silence the debate on the matters of religion. And Scott Morrison was going to mosques, claiming that this would be what he would be doing, protecting Muslims and members of other religions from criticism. I think what we really need is more freedom. And religious freedom, together with other freedoms, will be better served if you repeal at least 50% of the existing laws that we have, starting with anti-discrimination law. We need to get rid of every single one of them because they have been used as an instrument of bigotry and of oppression. Because the more intolerant you are, the more you feel offended. And if the threshold is offendedness, the law will inevitably be used as an instrument of tyranny, of oppression, and of the silencing of different opinions by the bigots. The real bigots use the law for their own benefit as a result.
Yes, I completely agree. And they're still going after your friend Margaret Court, who runs the Victory Life Church over in Perth, over her views on LGBT issues, which she doesn't speak about that often. It's just that the activists just choose to get offended over her beliefs, and she was dragged back into the political firing line because, well, she was rightfully awarded an AC, Australia Day honour, the highest honour. And our premier over here, Dan Andrews, had the nerve to criticise her, saying that her views cause deaths.
Yeah. Well, look, where is the Prime Minister on all these? He's always silent about helping Christians. He never says anything to protect us and to fight for the rights of people to have a different opinion. He was silent again and did nothing about the statements made by this premier. So now, to make it even worse, one of the leaders of the remaining members of the Liberal Party here in our parliament hates Christians. I mean, he's saying that the problem in the Liberal Party is that we have too many Christians. And this is what he said in that, and you can find this in the article written by the person in this Advanced Australia website.
Yep.
So, and that he got it from the Financial Review, by the way, where this person called David Honey is saying that they have a problem with the Christians in the party. I just find it amazing. So you have, for instance, Margaret Court, and Margaret Court is such a lovely lady, And you know what? It's a Court family. And Richard Court is Margaret Court's brother-in-law. Charles Court is her father-in-law, and Barry is a very committed Christian. Are these guys really so bold now that they can actually say that the people who are actually very important, influential in the Liberal Party should actually cease to be in the party, perhaps, or be quiet and silent just because they happen to hold conservative Christian values, and he himself happens to disagree with because he is a Greenie, and he would be, of course, far more comfortable if he joined the Communist Party of the Greens. He is directly responsible for the problem when he introduced an energy policy that was so ridiculous that even the Greens would not dare to uphold.
Or it wasn't a renewable energy policy. It was zero emissions by 2030.
Yeah. 2025 is the carbon thing. Can you read that? Just because I don't remember it. Have a look at the article and tell me what he's saying.
It got the support of the New South Wales Liberal Energy Minister, Matt Keane. And so there's a huge problem with the Liberal Party on the East Coast as well, given that he seems to be one of the most powerful people in the Liberal national government in that state. He supported Joe Biden for president, and he also said he was quite smug in saying bye-bye to Craig Kelly from the Liberal Party. We don't want you here anymore.
Well, look, as a matter of fact, Robert Menzies would be very proud of me when I resigned from the Liberal Party, when I wrote that letter explaining that because I'm a decent man, because I'm a moral man, I couldn't find in my conscience the capacity, even the strength to be trying to change the Liberal Party or by remaining in the Liberal Party. Robert Menzies was like me in this sense, or I am like him, they're the same. Let's put this in a chronological order. But I'm inspired by him. He was a great man. First of all, he was not afraid to be, as I am, a proud Presbyterian. And he mentions God all the time in his speeches. There is no problem whatsoever, even because the Western constitutional law tradition is based on the likes of John Locke and Sir Edward Coke. And if you see, they were more Christians than I am, because they were more fanatically committed to their faith than I am. So the whole tradition of individual rights and freedoms, inalienable rights, the fight against tyranny, it's all coming from this Christian philosophy and tradition. These people were directly inspired by Christian values. To be saying that these people, just because Margaret Court and others, they are the heirs to the classical liberal tradition, they are not welcome in the Liberal Party, is outrageous. They either don't know history, or they are trying to rewrite it and make it in a different way. Because if you are a classical liberal Christian, you are closer to the founding fathers of the nation than ever, especially the founders of classical liberalism, the likes of Locke, the likes of Thomas Jefferson and others, who were not afraid of saying that we hold these truths to be self-evident. That's just because these rights are not state-given. Otherwise, they couldn't be inalienable or self-evident. They believe that these rights are coming directly from a creator. But apart from this, even if you don't believe that, isn't that good to know that some people believe so that these rights cannot be removed by the state? If the state takes away, gives these rights, the state can take away. And blessed will be the name of this state. I don't think the state is the supreme authority. Our rights are belonging to us and should not be given and trusted to any authority whatsoever.
There's an expression that's repeated recently that a state which can provide you with everything can take it all away. And as you pointed out, the fallacy that our rights are given from the government, because that implies that they can take it away again. I want to get your thoughts on the ongoing inquiry into extremist movements in the era of the COVID pandemic. We had the ASIO chief, Mike Burgess, last night talk about how that they're no longer going to use the term far-right extremism or Islamic extremism, going to use the term ideologically motivated violent extremism and religiously motivated violent extremism. The biggest proponent of this inquiry was Labour's shadow Home spokeswoman Christina Keneally. She's been demanding Peter Dutton put far-right groups on the terror list. Though yesterday here in Melbourne, we got a reminder of their ongoing Islamist threat with Victoria Police. Well, it took a bit of questioning to get it out that the terror arrests were Islamic extremism related. Where do you see this inquiry going, and especially since what Mike Burgess said of ASIO last night?
If it comes from Christine Kennedy, nothing good can come from her. You remember that you have that gentleman, Andrew Cooper, who held an event here with
CPAC.
CPAC, and he invited Tony Abbott and others. Guess what the Department of the Attorney General did? Used, for the first time, the law of agents of foreign influence against them. And they got into big trouble. This woman there, Christine Kennedy, she was actually applauding this, and she went to Parliament to say that the law was being properly used. She has no concern for allowing people to have a different opinion. She loves to label others. The woman is intrinsically intolerant of other people's opinions. That is a very bad sign when you have her supporting any measure whatsoever. I will naturally be opposed to them. If she supports something, there is something wrong with the proposal. But going back to the proposal, this is a wishy-washy, morally relativistic approach where it cannot be more precise in the description of these movements. It really makes me suspicious that they want to include some right-wing groups, but they don't want to describe them as such, so that they can initiate a process that will be more of silencing of the groups that they particularly dislike. Obviously, that 99% of the groups that cause real violence are coming from two main sectors of the political spectrum. One is the Islamic aspect, and the other is the extreme left, especially groups such as Black Lives Matter, a fascistic movement, and another fascistic movement that's now causing all sorts of problems in America is that one,
Antifa.
Antifa, yeah. And it is even uses the colors of Mussolini's brigade on the streets. And Mussolini used the black color as the color of his paramilitary group, and Antifa uses exactly the same colors. So they are very much inspired by the principles of fascism in Italy. And then they claim to be Antifa, which is a very deceptive approach, but it reminds me of what George Orwell said, that one day right would be called wrong right, liberty would be called slavery, and vice versa. So these people claiming to be fascists, they are the real fascists, and they are very much inspired by the tactics and methods used by Mussolini, and why not to say by Lenin as well in the Soviet Union.
Now, when I last had you, or it was one of the final episodes of the Unshackled Waves, when I last chatted with you, we talked about Jair Bolsonaro's Brazil. And during the pandemic, he's been very vocal in wanting to keep Brazil open and free, but he's been, thwarted, undermined by the state governors. And I noticed that the international media is especially focused on the outbreaks and deaths in Brazil, seemingly to attack him. And he got coronavirus himself. He recovered. He credited hydroxychloroquine and also had some other colorful things to say about what happens to certain people if they get the virus. How do you think he's overall handled the pandemic from, well, not just a health perspective, but from, well, basically a societal perspective?
Yeah, he got the virus, and others leaders also contracted this virus, including Boris Johnson and Donald Trump, and they recovered. So I'm not so worried about even myself contracting the virus because I'm quite healthy. The chances of a person below the age of 60 to die of the disease is basically zero. If you are above 60 and you have a health condition, then you start to run into risks. That's why the lockdown measures are so stupid and so cruel and actually a violation of human rights, because you should protect the most vulnerable elements of the society and not destroy the economy and undermine the lives of so many innocent people. Certainly the lockdowns are going to lead to all sorts of unintended consequences of people dying of heart diseases or other conditions that are caused by the lockdown and other restrictive measures. If you take into account how many people have died in Brazil of other causes, coronavirus would be like at the number 50. There are so many others. Even crime itself in Brazil kills far more than the virus. And then you see that these people who where the deaths apparently come from, they come from states where the governors are adopting the lockdown, and they oppose the government, and they are actually inflating the numbers to accuse the president of having caused the problem. This thing is fabricated by an elite in order to put Brazil has less of the rule of law than Australia, and we have a man there in the presidency now trying to fight against corruption, to turn the country into a developed nation, has a real concern for the rights of the people, very different from people like Scott Morrison and others here. This man in Brazil really has a concern for the people. And that's why the elites are trying to destroy him, because the oligarchies of all over the world have decided to declare war on the people in order to implement this new order that they so much aspire, and that is called the Great Reset. So in Brazil, what's happening is a total fabrication of numbers. Many people are now dying. If they even die of an accident, a car accident, they say that they died of, the person has died of the virus. So do not believe in these lies, because it's all fabrication. It's aiming to do what they did to Donald Trump. Everybody who decides to do something to protect the people against the erratic behavior and arbitrary behavior of the ruling elites will become a target of these elites, and will do everything to destroy this person. And that's exactly what's happening to the president of Brazil.
Yes, it certainly seems from afar that those leaders who are wanting to keep their countries or jurisdictions open are targeted by the elites and, well, the mainstream media, and yes, the globalists as well, pushing this Great Reset. It's been fantastic to finally catch up with you, Augusto. We've been trying for a while to tee this up. You're very busy, but also very productive as well. So I'd encourage people to read your regular work on Epoch Times. That's where you've started contributing, and also Spectator, Quadrant, and also to consider also purchasing your books through Connaught Publishing as well.
Thank you very much, Dean. And by the way, the book is a publication also, apart from being Connaught, it is also a publication of the Western Australian Jurist. That's my law journal. And the next edition will be on wokeism, the woke movement. And we're going to get some of the best legal minds to discuss this topic. I promise to you a dream team of the best academics all over the world explaining to us what this wokeism movement is doing. Just wait a bit, because the articles in this new publication will be amazing.
Wokeism. I like that terminology. Well, I don't like wokeism itself, but it's a very, very apt description. So yes, I look forward to that book as well. Take care.
Thank you. A pleasure.
This is WilmsFront, brought to you by the Unshackled.net.
And that's the show for tonight. Now, some of you may know this special Thursday edition of WilmsFront is airing in place of the Dusty Bogan's Thirsty Thursday, which I'd been co-hosting in 2021. Thirsty Thursday is now on indefinite hiatus as Dusty is going to focus exclusively on his censored.tv content, but Thursday nights won't become a regular WilmsFront show night. It's just the day where I could book Augusto for an extensive interview where he could be generous with his time. And yes, there was certainly a lot, as you saw, to ask him and get his expertise on. WilmsFront will always air at least once a week on Wednesday evenings at 8:30 p.m. Melbourne time on the WilmsFront YouTube and DLive, and occasional extra episodes airing in the week like tonight. Now, I'll be back Sunday night. That's the new night for The Brawler and the Brain, hosted by myself and Jared Searby. So that's on 8:30 p.m. Victorian time. It's broadcast both on the Unshackled YouTube channel and also Jazz Searby's own YouTube channel. Then I'm got Mondays off now, so I can take a breather in between shows. Then I return, of course, Tuesday evening, 7 p.m. Melbourne time for Trad Tasman Talk, also on the Unshackled YouTube channel. And the Unshackled YouTube channel is also the home of regular reports from Tiger Mountain, hosted by Richard Wollstonecroft. He's launched a new series called Nanny State Nonsense, where he's going around Melbourne pointing out the various gripes that he has with the nanny state and their everyday lives on the roads, whether it be public works that we're walking past. So definitely make sure on the Unshackled YouTube channel and the WilmsFront channel for that matter, you not only subscribe, but click the bell to allow notifications, and also give a thumbs up to like, because certainly from time to time, there's some people, I don't know who they are, who like to downvote en masse. It's always good to make sure that we've got a good like ratio that helps with the algorithm war, that you like whenever you can. Of course, still publishing regular articles on the unshackled.net. That's also the Unshackled Productions archive there. And you can follow me to get updates on the latest Unshackled content and notifications when the show is about to go live by following me on Telegram, Gab, Minds, and the Unshackled is also on that platforms as well. We are on Twitter and Facebook, but certainly I'm focusing more and more of my time and engaging with the Unshackled and WilmsFront followers on those alternate free speech media platforms. So have a great weekend, and I'll see you Sunday evening for The Brawler and the Brain. Take care, everybody. Good night.
Thanks for tuning in to WilmsFront. Visit timwilms.com or Rational Rise TV to view the archive of episodes. And keep visiting the Unshackled.net to view all our shows, and to keep up with the latest real news and analysis.